Okay.
It's high
I
priority.
can't, I can't see it. So, I'll just, uh, unfortunately, I can't see it. I'll go ahead and get started and just say which slide I'm on then, and then, we can go from there. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about, government contracting. Um, this is going to be basically a 1 hour presentation, 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll have a little bit of time at the end for questions and comments. So basically, in a 1 hour presentation, you're not going to get everything that you would need to know about contracting. But it should give you a good overview and some information about what you would need to know if you are interested in federal contracting and certifications. We're going to talk about federal certifications. So, but just as a caveat, federal contracting is a complex, confusing process. So it's important to remember, that it's going to take time and research on your part as well, obviously. Slide number 2, please. Um, okay, this is just an overview of what we're going to discuss: small business federal contracting certifications. The There are several of them. Each has their own unique requirements. Um, Most of them apply to the socioeconomic um, status of the individual owners. One in particular does not, and that one is called the HUBZone program. We'll talk a little bit about that one as well. But you'll start to notice some common themes in a lot of what we're going to discuss in terms of what they're, except for the HUBZone one, because that one's a little different, like I said, in that the other ones require some of the most some similar things, namely that the participant, the individual, uh, needs to be owner 51%. They also have to have control, which we'll talk a little bit about. And you know, it, as I mentioned, you'll notice that a lot of them are similar. Obviously, there's some that are they're not exactly the same programs. They apply to different groups, and they're also have a little bit of different requirements for each individual one. Slide 3, please. Uh, First one we're going to talk about is the women-owned small business and the economically disadvantaged women-owned small business certification. Slide 4, please. So the women-owned small business program allows contracting officers to set aside. They're called set-asides. To set aside contracts for women-owned small businesses that include economically disadvantaged women-owned small businesses. And this is important because it offers a unique opportunity for those contracting officers, in this case, to set aside 5% of the agency budget that they are trying to award to women-owned small businesses. SBA provides these certifications, and there are requirements, which we'll talk about here in the next slide. But that allows those businesses to build capacity and grow and access set-asides. In this case as well, and with some of the other programs, it also allows for what's called sole source contracts, and those are very advantageous as well, because those sole source contracts allow contracting officers to award a contract without competing it. And that is just a huge advantage. When there's the fact that we discuss pretty frequently that excuse me, let me turn that off. That most of these contracting programs are self-marketing programs, which means obviously you're going to have to get out there and look at the contracts that are available, and there's resources that are available for that as well that we can help you with, and certainly MBDA and others can help you with. Small Business Development Center, the PTAC. And once you identify some of them, then you would want to self-market yourself to those agencies and to those contracting officers. What makes it good with these programs is, sole source actually makes it easier on the contracting officers and those agencies as well. There are thresholds though for this one. It's 6.5 million for manufacturing and 4 million for services. We'll go to, let me see, keep my eye on it here. We'll go to slide 5. Yeah. So, when you ask yourself, is this a good program for you? These are some of the requirements. The the participant needs to be the highest officer position. There's certain NAICS codes that are applicable and certain ones are not. There is no minimum time in business for this program. Others there are, and we'll get into that. And like I mentioned before, there is a 51% ownership requirement. And I didn't mention NAICS codes. NAICS codes, and at the end, if there's any questions, feel free to let me know at the end. So a lot of acronyms also, I will say, in the federal government space. NAICS is one of them, stands for North American Identification and Classification System. Basically, every segment of business has its own code that applies to it, so that, to make it easier for identification purposes in government contracting. So if it's, for example, something like construction is going to have its own broad NAICS code, and then under that there'll be HVAC and electrical, and they'll each have their own as well. So in this case, in order to qualify, it must be a small business concern for the primary NAICS code. And as I mentioned, there's limited NAICS codes for this one. I don't know what they all are. I think there's 44 of them. But later on, if you wanted to follow up and get a list of those, we can certainly put you in contact with the office that manages these programs. In this case, and with most of the other ones, there is an office at headquarters dedicated specifically to this program. So lately, I've been actually dealing with these programs a lot and working directly with that office. So I can certainly put folks in touch with them. I will say as well, the difference between the economically disadvantaged and the regular is just a net worth cap threshold and revenue and other things like that. Whereas there's not that requirement for the general women-owned, and we can provide additional information on that as well. Slide 6, please. Okay, so here's the requirements. We went over this a little bit. NAICS codes 51%. Some of these are kind of duplicative. When I mention control, that means management must be controlled by a woman or women who are U.S. citizens, and that individual must manage the daily business operations of the company and hold the highest position within the company. And that means having managerial experience required to run the company, and those are things that are looked at when applying for the program. And also, the question of control deals with devoting full-time attention to the company during normal work hours. And I'll give an example for this. It's something like, if someone's a CEO, but they're not really in charge of the company, let's say somebody else is in charge of the day-to-day operations, then it wouldn't qualify. It has to be somebody with full dedication to the company. But it also could be one or more women must make the long-term decisions for the business. So in that sense, if there's multiple owners and they're women, then that's fine. But it has to be that the ones that are applying for status as women-owned, they have to be in control of the business. Slide 7, please. As I mentioned, there are a little bit of different requirements for the economically disadvantaged women-owned business program. There's net worth thresholds, caps, you could call them, assets, personal net worth of less than 750,000, and a 3-year AGI. That's another acronym, adjusted gross income of 350 or less, and a fair market value of all assets underneath $6 million. And the one that usually is, as I mentioned, the AGI there, if you're thinking you're on the edge there for one of these, certainly the office, the women-owned small business office, can help you answer any of those questions. Let's go to slide 7. No, excuse me, slide 8. So looking into eligibility process, basically you would register on it's not SAM anymore, it's beta.certify.gov, .sba.gov. By the way, that beta.certify.sba.gov is also a really great resource in general on the front end before you get into any, questions that you may want to pose to resource partners and or SBA. It's just a great site. They got all kinds of FAQs, overviews of these programs, and things like that. And then once you're ready to apply, then you would start that process within that portal. And if you did have any questions, which like I said, I've been getting a few here and there lately, you can certainly reach out to us directly at SBA. And what I do is typically, if I don't have the answer, I'll just put you in contact with that office. We got some points of contact there, and they're very helpful. Slide 9, please. This is just a little bit more about that homepage. You can request information from SBA there as well, and you would have your own account and with your own password, and check on your application, check on status and things like that. Slide 10, please. This is exactly what I just went over. I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll skip that one. Slide 11, please. Yeah. So when you are ready to apply, there also is a checklist to guide you through the process. And this is important, I find, with not just this program, but with other programs as well. Because in a lot of cases, especially as, for example, with the economically disadvantaged small business program, just as an example, you're going to need to have, tax returns ready and available, when you apply, personal financial information, information about yourself, your business, your background, all of those things you're going to want to know and have prepared with you before you start. Obviously, you can go back and forth and get that information later. But I've found when I've talked to companies, especially with not just this program, but with the 8A program, that they find it valuable to go over these checklists so that they know upfront what they need. Slide 12, please. These dates are actually in the past, and that deals a little bit with some of the switches that occurred. We won't really dwell on this too much, but basically it dealt with a switch from one portal to another, but everything is on the bottom one that's mentioned there now, beta.certify.sba.gov. Slide 13, please. And like I said, this is a recent presentation. I don't know why they leave these in here, but we don't really need to dwell on this either. All these things are already switched over, so you'll get all the information you need on the Certify website. Slide 14, please. Just as an example, these used to be third-party certifiers. Currently, I think because of the transition, they were still accepting some of them, but I can confirm that. But I will give you this information if you wanted to reach out to some of these third-party certifiers. Additionally, as it applies to certifications in general, a lot of the questions that I get revolve around the question of what is this certification good for, like who accepts it? And that question is important because some of those other ones listed here, if you're interested in doing work, let's say with the city or a municipality or a county or a state, certain certifications are not going to apply. And I'll give you an example. I was talking with an applicant recently, a woman trying to look into the woman-owned small business certification, the federal one that we're talking about. But she didn't want to do any work with the federal government. She was looking to do work with the city of Los Angeles and potentially the state of California. So after talking about it, I told her that it was probably a good idea to talk with the SBDC and the PTAC and always ask who accepts this certification. And for her purposes, she was still interested in the federal one because at some point she thought she would get into federal work, but not in the short term. So these resources are still good for looking at other opportunities for certifications that can be used by other parties external to the federal government. Give me 1 second. I had to switch my view up here. We can skip slide 15. These are more program changes. And let's go to slide 16. Oh, okay. So, looking at how to get the most out of the Women-Owned Small Business Program, and keep in mind, like I said, a lot of this applies to some of these other programs. There's 444 NAICS codes eligible for set-asides and sole sources, 364 for women-owned, and 80 for economically disadvantaged women-owned. And the list of eligible NAICS codes are available at sba.gov/WOSB. Both self-certified and third-party certified businesses must provide eligibility. You got to provide eligibility documents in Certify. And these are important, great programs to look at, but it's also very important to look at which ones apply. If you're in an industry that, you're not in one of those NAICS codes, then maybe this is not the program for you, and you might want to look at other ones. There's always certainly other opportunities out there. And there's also associated with this program, access to training, management, technical assistance programs, guaranteed loans, and bonding assistance. This is also a very valuable piece right here that I want to highlight, because a lot of times folks coming into the federal contracting space or contracting in general might not have a lot of experience with contracting, and these courses are really, really terrific. There's so many subjects. I get them every week. In my capacity of what I do, I'm also in charge of the 8A program after participants are already in. And usually we get every week those technical training programs are called 7J programs. Also, when I mentioned 8A, those, like I said, there's a lot of acronyms, and there's a lot of other, I guess, coded wording, right? Those two actually just come from the regulation. That's the number it is in the regulation that when it was created. So 7J basically are training courses. I'll give you an example of some. How to manage a contract, how to market to contracting officers, how to come up with a capability statement, how to develop compliance processes to keep you in good stead with managing contracts. All these type of things, there's constant training on them, and that's one of the big benefits of this program and a lot of the programs is access to those training resources. Slide 17, please. So we had talked a little bit about the set-asides as well. Set-asides, as I mentioned, for this one are 5%. I mentioned as well the 444 and the 80 applied. And in this case, for there's what's called a rule of two. Contracting officer has reasonable expectations that two or more women-owned small businesses will submit an offer, and the award price is the contract must be awarded at a fair market price. And that's typical of most contracts. I mean, they're all going to be awarded at a fair market price. That doesn't really differ from general contracts. Slide 18, please. So this is a little bit about sole source. In general, as I mentioned, a sole source contract is a contract where the contracting officer does not need to compete the contract. And in order to make that award to one of these types of businesses, the following conditions have to be met. Is the contract in a woman-owned or economically disadvantaged woman-owned eligible NAICS code, as we've discussed? Is the contract including options valued at 6.5 million or less for manufacturing contracts, or 4 million or less for all other contracts? And notice those numbers. I mean, those are not insignificant numbers. So you can ideally, as an example, if you're in one of these NAICS codes, you can get a sole source contract for anything under 4 million for the broader category of NAICS codes. And can the contract be awarded at a fair and reasonable price? And that goes to just in general how you're pricing things when you make contract offers to the federal government. And lastly, is there within the determination, is there a reasonable expectation that there is only one woman-owned small business or economically disadvantaged that can perform that? And this all goes to the fact that the WOSB program is a business development program without authority to make a direct award. So it's important to recognize this distinction, that the certification program is a business development program that includes the technical assistance that I mentioned earlier. Now, the agencies are required to prepare and approve justification and approval of the contracts. That's the actual, the contracting vehicle that would provide those benefits. Slide 19, please. This is a little bit of a duplicative one. I'll just re-emphasize the bottom part here. One of the big benefits here for building your opportunity to build capacity and grow through set-asides and sole source contracts is also access to training and all those technical assistance programs. If you want more information on those two, I can certainly send you more information on those. Slide 20, please. Give me 1 second here. This is a large, probably one of the largest, most complex programs, the 8A Business Development Program. And as I mentioned, this is the program that I have oversight of at the district office level. And just for context as well, that's kind of once a company comes in, whatever area they're in, then they would be under the portfolio for that district office. And we have 6 throughout the state of California, and there's dozens of offices throughout the country. So in any state you would be in or doing work as it applies to construction, you would be dealing with the district office as it applies to this program. It doesn't want to go forward. Bear with me here, technology issues here. 1 second. Let's go. Slide 21, please. So this program is designed to assist socially and economically disadvantaged small businesses and allow them to better compete in the federal marketplace. Did we move to slide 21? I still see the blue screen, but that could have frozen up on me.
Carlos?
Yes, hello?
Yeah, you just turn off your camera. So would you please turn on your camera?
Okay, now we're on the right one. Oh, okay, let me look at that. Sure, give me a second.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, thank you.
All right, now we're on the right one. So a certified firm for this program has the potential to do some of the similar things, to receive sole source sole source contracts. That's those no competition contracts. And the numbers are similar. It's a little higher in this one. It's 4.5 million for goods and services, including construction, and 7.5 million for manufactured requirements. So just a little bit more. This is a broader category, I guess. And the federal government has specified annual prime contracting goals for designated small businesses. For small disadvantaged businesses, which includes the 8A program, it's a 5%. So this one, the previous one's 5%, the other one's 5% as well. This is a term program. It's for 9 years. The first 4 years are considered developmental stage, and the last 5 years are considered transitional stage that have what's called BAT requirements. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Those BAT stands for business acquisition targets. So continuation in the program is dependent upon the firm's continued eligibility. And this is what I deal with directly. As a socially and economically disadvantaged firm with day-to-day management control by the individual who is based, who the eligibility is based on. And the program provides business development support as well, technical assistance. So as I mentioned, you're going to notice some common themes there. Let's go to slide 22. So number one, you got the technical assistance. The government contracting is the second part. You know, the goal is to help these disadvantaged businesses understand and succeed in government contracting. It's a business development program similar to the previous one, and to assist and graduate firms to allow them to thrive competitively. And there's ways that the program is set up to support that transition. And as I mentioned, this is the name of these programs often comes from the regulation. In this case, it's Section 204 of Public Law 100-656. The requirement also stipulates the 51% owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged. Let's go to slide 24. Oh no, 23, sorry. So same thing here. You're going to look at is if this program is appropriate for you. NAICS codes, are you socially and economically disadvantaged? Do you have a diminished ability to compete? There is a requirement for 2 years in business for this one, though. Actually, when we go to 23, I think we got ahead of ourselves here. On mine, it shows 23. It's the next one. I think you're seeing something different than me. I don't know why. That's all right. We'll just move through these. That's all right. It may have been a different version I sent you there, but the information's the same. As I mentioned, there's a you have to be in business for 2 years, and this is going to be verified by federal tax returns. Give me 1 second though. Let me. Oh, I see which one you're on. Yeah, I'll just go ahead and keep speaking on this, and we'll on mine that's 25. So you can just leave it on that one, and then I'll let you know when we get there and get past that.
Carlos, we don't have 23.
I couldn't hear you.
We don't have 23.
That's fine. Like I said, we can stay on the one you're on right now, and I'll tell you when to switch forward if we're good. We can do that. Okay, so continuing, you'll notice, as I mentioned, a lot of the same requirements. 51% unconditionally and directly owned. There's the question of a control comes into play as well. That person needs to be 100% in control of the company. It needs to be owned by a socially and economically disadvantaged individual who are citizens of the United States, except for Indian tribes, Alaska Native corporations, Native Hawaiian organizations, or community development corporations. So these are some additional categories. And socially and disadvantaged firms whose ability to compete in free enterprise has been impaired due to diminished capital or credit opportunities, as well as those who have been subject to racial or ethnic prejudice, cultural bias in American society. And there's some that I'm going to mention here that are already identified. So for initial 8A eligibility, there's these thresholds as well as mentioned on the other one. So the net worth of the individual coming in claiming disadvantage must be less than $250,000. For continued eligibility, the net worth must be less than $750,000. So once you're already in, obviously, you know, the goal is to be working to receive government contracts. So once you're already in, that goes up to $750,000. As long as you're under $750,000, you would still be eligible. And we'll go to the next one that you're on. So these are the rules for the program. As I mentioned, these are very, very complex programs. In particular, this one, there's the The rule requirements are all listed here in 13 CFR Part 124, eligibility. And then there's the FAR as well that deals with 8A contracts and all the requirements for awarding those contracts. There's also size requirements and disadvantage criteria that deal with whether an individual applicant falls into those pre-identified categories. And I have them all listed here in my notes. If you wanted to read or start reading this CFR, I can certainly send it to you. And it would be a good idea on the front end if you're looking to apply for this program. I will say as well, it typically takes, in order to get approved into this program, an average of 12 to 18 months. So it's not a short runway in terms of the length of time, and there is a lot of research required up front, and there's a lot of exchange of information with the program management at headquarters. Next slide, please. So like I said, there's this 2 years in business requirements. There is a waiver for the 2 years. I haven't seen it happen very many times, and most of the time, just as a general, rule of thumb, this is not 100%, but it's in something that the government has a very particular need for at that time. I'm sure it may have come up during the pandemic where certain things they may have allowed companies to sell to the federal government that had maybe less than 2 if they needed certain things. Excuse me. I know that in the past, I've dealt with companies in one field in particular where that requirement has been waived, which is cybersecurity. So see, these are some of the reasons the SBA may waive the 2-year rule. I wouldn't depend on it. Like I said, I don't see it happen very much. Next slide, please. So I had mentioned some identified groups, right? So these are designated groups, and this is a list of them. If you fall into one of these categories, then you would fall into that designation for socially disadvantaged. Asian Pacific American actually has a very long list. I won't go into everything, but I can certainly provide this information. It actually lists specific countries of origin, and I'll mention a couple here. There's more, but they start with origins from Burma, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia. I'll mention them all. This list isn't that long. Singapore, Brunei, Japan, China, Taiwan, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Korea, the Philippines, U.S. Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands, Republic of the Marshall Islands, Federal State of Micronesia, Northern Mariana Islands, Guam, Samoa, Macau, Fiji, Tonga, Kiribati, Tavula, or Nauru. Also, keep in mind that there's a list of categories that deal with Native Americans. There's a list as well. Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians, enrolled members of federally or state recognized Indian tribes. And if they're not an enrolled member of a federally or state recognized Indian tribe individual, there must be a preponderance of evidence. And that applies to other scenarios where maybe an applicant says, I don't fall into one of these categories. They can still apply and provide that information, which is called a preponderance of evidence. There's also a subcontinent, Asia American, that is has its own list. I'll mention those as well. Individuals with origins from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Maldives Islands, Nepal. Small businesses believe if the firm is approved for disadvantaged business certification by their state or entity, the firm automatically is eligible for SBA certification, and this is not so. See, as you can see, the requirements on this program are very, very specific. So just because, as I mentioned before, if an individual thinks, well, I apply, excuse me, I qualified for this program, I should qualify for this other program. That's not necessarily true. So it's important just to get confirmation. And I had one, the other day. It was a question not associated with this, but an eligibility question that I didn't really know the answer to. But if you have those questions, feel free to contact myself or our office. And your hosts have all of our contact information, and I'll provide it additionally if necessary as well. And we can just answer those one-off questions, or if you have a few of them about some of the qualification requirements. Next slide, please. These are very similar as I mentioned earlier. Thresholds for fair market value of assets, almost the same as the women's program. Same on the top, 750 once you're into the program. So we won't harp on that. Next slide, please. Size requirements. This size requirement it deals with. Give me one second. This size requirement deals with the size thresholds that are set up as associated with the NAICS codes. So a little background on that. Each individual NAICS code has its own requirement for size based on revenue or number of employees. Number of employees usually for manufacturing, dealers, and wholesalers. And there's also more information on this in the CFR. You can also get broad information by going to sba.gov/size, and then you'll be able to find out all the information related to that. So as an example, you would go there and look up your particular NAICS code and look at the size requirements, and it'll tell you, I'll give you an example that I see very commonly. For a lot of them, it's around, I guess they were raised recently, it's around 16 million or 16.5 million. So, if you're in a particular NAICS code and your annual revenue is 20 million a year, you wouldn't qualify. But if you're, at 5 or 10, just as in this example, then you would. So the next one is ownership. Needs to be at least, as I mentioned with the previous, 51% unconditional ownership by the disadvantaged individual or individuals, whether that be a partnership, an LLC, a corporation. The SBA will review partnership agreements, stock certificates and ledgers, IRS information. There's also the control and management requirement, hold the highest position, highest compensated individual as well. This is a unique one to this one. And there are some situations where there can be a waiver for the highest compensated individual, but that's rare as well. Let's say that you're doing something science and technology related, and you have subject matter experts come in. Let's say you have some PhD scientists, and because of the nature of the work that they do, some of them might be higher compensated. But the general rule is that the participant must be the highest compensated individual. Some other eligibility requirements: 2 years in operation, as I mentioned, financial capability. All these things related to capacity will be discussed or reviewed during the application process. Need to have management and technical capability. They'll be looking at everybody's resumes and ability to perform on federal contracts. Character, what shows the lack of good character? That would be adverse information regarding criminal conduct, any person who's incarcerated on parole, probation, violations of any SBA regulations, debarred or suspended, lack of business integrity. This was the question that I got recently, so just for context. The question that I received, and here's the answer, I guess, a little example. If an individual has ever defaulted on an SBA loan, can they apply for and be admitted to the 8A program? And the answer is no. So if anybody had defaulted on an SBA loan, then they're not not eligible. Let me see. Yeah, I think I skipped some. Okay, no, we're good to go. Next slide, please. So the 8A program, it is a business development program, as I mentioned, and it offers a broad scope of assistance to firms that are at least 51 controlled by the socio and economically disadvantaged individual. The goal is to assist and graduate those firms so that they can thrive in the competitive environment of government contracting. And the SBA supports that as well through the technical assistance that's provided, in this case 7J training. And 8A firms are also able to form joint ventures to bid on contracts or form mentor-protégé programs, which we'll talk a little bit about, which allows the small business to learn the ropes from other more experienced businesses. Next slide, please. So these are some expectations, setting expectations, overviews here. Is the bit, as I mentioned, it's a business development program. Participants are in no way guaranteed or entitled to receive federal contracts, which is often a misconception that once you get into the program, you're going to automatically get contracts, which is not true. There still is the requirement to do a lot of your own self-marketing. That's the main way that contracts are going to be awarded. So you need to maintain a balance between between commercial and government contracts. During the transition years, there's a business activity target, and it starts low. It starts at 15, then it goes up to 25, 30, and meets 50 at year 9. And basically what that means is that the business should be not completely dependent upon federal contracts, and you could kind of try to scale it starting at year 5 and going to the end of the program, so that by the end of the program, individuals are prepared for being successful via a good hybrid of federal and non-federal contracts. Next slide, please. Well, that's I kind of got ahead of myself there. So this is the just a little look, developmental, and it does take a lot of time. And most firms that get in, you might not receive a contract in that first year. I hadn't seen any until recently. I had one got her first contract within her first year. That's in our portfolio now. So that's not to say it's impossible. It can happen. Firms do it. I mean, there's many district offices throughout the country. I'm sure a lot of them see it. So to maintain eligibility as well, it's important. The portion I deal with is this first part here that says submit an 8A annual update on time. Every year, firms in this program need to submit for an annual review, and that's basically all, submitting all your financials again, submitting everything, not everything, but almost everything that was submitted initially to get into the program. W-2s, personal financial information, information on the revenues of the program, net worth of individual participants, all those types of things. Give me 1 second here. And there's other requirements. One in particular, anything that changes for the firm needs to be reported to SBA. For example, SBA needs to have prior written approval if the business structure changes. So let's say you wanted to go from an LLC to an S Corp, then you would need to let us know. Also need to maintain DSB, SAM and DSBS profiles. This is an important one to go on and look at. I'm going to mention this one for research purposes. This one down here at the bottom that says DSBS, that stands for Dynamic Small Business Search. You can do that type of research on the front end as well. I talk to current participants about the value of this. Federal agencies can go on there and look for companies, and let's say they were looking for firms to do sole source. They can go on there. This is public information as well, by the way. If you wanted to look at other firms, type of work that they're doing, what agencies that they're doing work for, all this type of information, this is a great place to kind of poke around a little bit and look on their website and just look through company profiles and see what they're doing. Next slide, please. So this is the, by the way, I know we're getting up to about 10:36 here, and I'm going to go till about 10:45, and then we'll stop and see if we have any questions. I might start skipping through some of these real quick. I know this is as I mentioned, this is a really, really long presentation and a lot of information. So if we needed to come back and go over some of the other information later, we certainly could, and I could provide more context. But here's a quick overview of how to apply. First, you have to have a DUNS number. You have to identify your primary NAICS code, register with SAM, go on to certified.sba.gov. And great resources for this are your MBDA and your small business development centers, and also the PTAC, who really deals specifically with government contracting. Next slide, please. We already talked a lot about certify. We can skip this one. This is the business development that's available. Once a company is in, they get an orientation at the district office. They also get referrals and training, as I mentioned. Marketing invitation to business development events, things that are put on by SBA, and information about other ones. And there's also access to surety bond programs. Next slide, please. This one's very similar. I'm not going to harp on this slide either to the woman-owned. This is information about how the program creates value, and it's really sole source and set-asides and technical assistance if you wanted to distill it. Next slide. So the next one is the service disabled veteran-owned business. This actually program was managed out of VA, Department of Veterans Affairs. It's transitioning to SBA right now, currently. So the expectation is that it will transfer by next year. So we're right in the middle of the transition phase. There's a lot of movement on this program right now in terms of new FAQs about the program, what the transition looks like, the value and benefit of the program. So this one, as I mentioned, this one is kind of right in the middle of transitioning. So there's a lot of new information. If you're interested in this, I'm actually a veteran myself. If you're interested in more information on this one, I can certainly provide it. Next slide, please. So this program was establishing the criteria to be used in federal contracting is whether an individual is service disabled veteran. And this is an important distinction because it's not a program for all veterans. It's a program for service disabled veterans. And there's requirements associated with that, namely that there is a service disabled disability rating provided by the VA. And then after that, a lot of the other requirements are similar to the previous ones we discussed. 51% ownership, there has to be control, things like that. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, you'll see here very similar themes. We're not going to harp on this because it's almost the same as these other programs. I will say that the difference here is that the goal for the program, as opposed to 5% for the previous two, is 3% for this one. Next slide, please. You'll notice here, same kind of thing for this one on this slide. We'll skip, trying to get through as many of these as we can. Next slide. Now, I had mentioned this one briefly earlier. The SBA Mentor-Protégé program is a fantastic program for partnering with other companies, typically that have already been in the, give me a sec, that have already been in the program before, the 8A program. Most cases, those are programs that are maybe in the transition phase and have started to look at things that they can do to support their function for moving out of the program. It's important to remember a distinction here, though, and that distinction is that the Mentor-Protégé program is the business development portion of it, and the actual contracting vehicle is the joint venture. They're two separate things. So once a company forms a joint venture, let's say, a Mentor-Protégé program, company A is partnered with company B, the entity, they would create a joint venture, which would be kind of its own entity, and the one that would apply for the contracts would be the joint venture. Let's see. Okay, next slide, please. So the purpose of the Mentor-Protégé program is to provide the small business development assistance. So the protege should be getting some enhanced ability via the participation in the program, and the way it does that is the protege pairs with a mentor company, usually that larger business. Most cases, maybe it's been in the 8A program, and that's so that they can build capacity, right? So they can learn more about contracts and learn how to grow and compete on federal contracts. There always is a question of does SBA or does the federal government do the partnering? And the answer is no. And you really wouldn't want the federal government to be partnering you up with another company anyway. The best way to move forward with this is to find a company based on what you're doing that you feel would benefit you as a protege. And it's also important to recognize these things get reviewed by SBA. SBA does not authorize MPAs for which no work has been documented in a secondary NAICS code. Also, SBA is going to be looking at what advantage does the protege receive from its involvement with the program. Next slide, please. So the applicant has to have a mentor identified, as I mentioned, prior to applying for the program. SBA is not going to partner you up on one. You have to do an online tutorial. Both the mentor and the protege have to complete the courses and upload the completion certificates, file as part of the application. They have to be for-profit or an agricultural cooperative. There's many other requirements of this program. One of the main ones is the split of the work that is done on the contract. So, for example, mentors cannot own more than 40% equity in the protege business as well. But once they're applying to do the work, there's requirements for the amount of work that needs to be done by the protege. So, for example, if two companies enter into mentor-protege arrangement and they receive a contract, you can't have an environment where the mentor does 80% of the work and the protege only does 20. There are still allowances for those two parties to subcontract as well, and there's caps on those as well. I think it's a 60-40 split, and then of the 60% split that the company would have to have, the protege has to perform at least 50% of that split, and 40% can be subcontracted. Don't quote me on that though. I think I might have been off on that, but there is a good overview sheet that I can provide on the splits. The important thing to remember here is that there are very outlined requirements for the amount of work that needs to be performed on these contracts by each party involved. Next slide, please. So for getting the most out of the Protégé program, it's the same as before. It's a business development program. Joint venture, the actual joint venture used to be a requirement that all of them were reviewed by legal staff at SBA. One of the big changes recently was that that requirement was removed, except for as it applies to sole source contracts. So in general, I mean, there's pros and cons to that. I think the general benefit in the past was that if those were reviewed by our legal folks, there was a greater maybe assurance that the way that the joint venture was written was explicitly set up to ensure that the protege was protected in the terms of the contract, and now we're not reviewing it, so it's still probably recommended that the proteges get someone to review that and ensure that the rights and responsibilities are all outlined and set up in a way to protect the parties that are involved. Next slide, please. We're going to skip this. We're getting to the end of the time here. More information on joint. I want to quickly discuss HUBZone. As I mentioned, this is the only program within the certification programs that's not based upon the socioeconomic disadvantage of the individual. This is based upon what has been identified as historically underutilized business zones. Next slide, please. And SBA has a map of these. They're based on census tracts and information that it gets from census, which is part of Commerce. The HUBZone goal is also 3%, and there's a lot of requirements that go along with this program. There's a minimum requirement for the number of employees that live in the actual HUBZone, in a HUBZone. This is an important distinction as well. So there's a requirement for a certain minimum percentage of employees that live in a HUBZone. It doesn't need to be the HUBZone where the business is. So let's say that there's two adjacent HUBZones and they live in another one, but it's still a HUBZone, then that would count. By the way, just as before I get ahead of myself, I know we're getting to the end here, so I'm kind of trying to speed up. The definition of a HUBZone is an area designated are typically areas of low to medium household income, high employment, or both. And they provide unemployment opportunities for the underserved is the goal of these programs. The federal government has provided specified annual prime contracting goals for designated small businesses, and as I mentioned, for this one, it's 3%. You can also see the map to find out, hey, am I in one of these zones? I've helped folks with this as well. Some of them are from the interactive map. Based on what I've seen, it's very easy to tell whether your business or home are located in there. You go to sba.gov/content-hubzone -maps, and I can send that to folks as well. There's 6 different kinds of HUBZones. We're not going to have time for that. Let's go to the next slide. Let's skip through these. I want to see, keep going. And we're down to about 10 minutes. We're going to skip through all the HUBZone information. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought it was the last one. There is more information that's available on these hub zones and the requirements of the program. I will say it does require site visits and recertification similar to the 8A program, which means we go out and look at the actual location of the facility, make sure that there's proper signage and that there's actually business being done there. It's not a shared space, other things like this. It is a 35%, as I mentioned earlier, hub zone employee residency requirement. So that means 35% minimum of the employees need to live in a hub zone, not that particular hub zone. That's the end of the presentation. I wanted to leave a little bit of time. I know that's a whole lot of information, and that's because I skipped through it, a lot of it. I want to make sure that we hit each one of the subject matter, but for each individual one, as I mentioned, there's much more deep dive information that we can get into and I can provide information on. As I mentioned, the hosts have my contact information, but for anyone that wants it, I'll just say it right now. It's carlos.gutierrez@sba.gov. Feel free to reach out to us. You can also look at information about these programs and general SBA and San Francisco area-based information by going to our website. As I mentioned, San Francisco District Office for the Small Business Administration. I'll stop there and turn it over to our host to see if there's just a few questions we may have at the end here, and then we can turn it over and move forward.